short because I've brought a bit of a special guest with me today, who I'm going to bring up in a few minutes, and he's going to share some of his ideas with you. But what I'd like to do for my presentation about Reggio Children, SENsory Atelier, and looking at outcomes as well, is just to hone in on a few of the key aspects of this approach and what it meant for me in learning and understanding them, and also how it's impacted on what we do at Westgate School. Okay. Right, so first of all we have to go back to where this all comes from, the Principality of Reggio Emilia in northern Italy. I think as referenced earlier, it's kind of understandable that in the liberation from fascism, a new perspective on early childhood education emerged. And perhaps your priorities at that time don't become so much about long-term economic goals or consideration of children as the workforce of tomorrow, but actually those key Reggio words, the rights of the child and nothing without joy. So again, I think it's really important to mention that Reggio Children and also the SENsory Atelier, this is not a framework, this is not a curriculum. You can't open the book to page 10 of the Reggio approach and start teaching from it. Okay? But within all of these fantastic ideas, you know, the role of art within the curriculum, the importance of aesthetics and experience, there are key pedagogical ideas that affected me personally and I took away from that visit to Italy and other conversations with our colleagues from the special schools. So we can skip on. Two of the main ones for me, and the ones that we've gone ahead and tried to implement this year at Westgate School, is first of all, environment as the third educator. So adults and other children as the first two educators, but then the environment itself, you know, the impact the environment can have. Now, anyone who works in a special school will know that this can be a bit of a challenge for us. Our young people, they explore their environments in different ways. I remember really clearly one day, while we were over in Reggio Emilia, walking into one of the preschools that we got to visit, into this just beautiful, beautiful space where every single detail had been so carefully considered. And I looked at this sort of sculpture, this model that they've built, these beautiful little wooden blocks that have been stacked in such a particular way to form this fantastic pyramid. And I thought, what would Ziggy, for example, one of our youngsters, what would he do? And the whole thing would go flying across the room. Of course he would. What great fun that would be, and why not, you know? So we have to think about things slightly differently in how we approach our environments. There have to be enabled spaces, that bamboozle idea. But also, when I was talking to our staff about this, I said, you know, obviously our children explore their environments in a different way, but this doesn't mean that we don't take absolute care, absolute pride every day in presenting them the best possible space. I took a phrase actually from Teen Teach training, which is obviously a completely separate thing, but that phrase when we say to people, what would you want someone else to do if it was your child? And I think in having those conversations, it really embedded that idea that yes, I do need to put that extra care every day. Even if it gets wrecked, even if they explore it, even if things get broken, every day we do our best to present them with the best possible environment. That's what we've been doing this year. We're a certain way along in that journey. Things cost money, so it's not always the easiest thing in the world, but it's an idea that we've really ran with. The second idea that we're coming to implement soon is what we describe as the pedagogy of documentation taken from Reggio Children. It was one thing that really struck me again whilst being out there in Italy. In every single school you would walk into, you would be met by someone doing this. If you look around the space, photos everywhere. But the key element of this that really stood out to me was when they described to us that several times a week, everybody in those schools, including the cook, the teachers, the teaching assistants, everybody involved would sit down and they would look at those photos and they would consider, how did learning take place? What can we learn from this evidence? I think too often in schools in general, we collect this evidence and it goes into a file, and the purpose of that evidence is, you know, when we have visitors, when we have parents in, then we'll get it out and go, look, isn't this great? But how often do we as practitioners collect that evidence, sit down together and go, what can we learn from this? So this is going to be the next step for Westgate School. We're bringing in different programmes. I will just do also a nod to the data and assessment group. Because, on the back of the relationships that were formed in Italy, as Jess sort of acknowledged, it's led to a lot more collaboration within that particular group. And actually an outcome of that is that I'm implementing ideas that both Netherhall and Ellesmere are already using to help support the pedagogy documentation. So one thing that I did just want to speak briefly about was one of the things I struggled most with, and I think I have to go right back to the beginning to talk about this world without outcomes. Again, coming out of COVID, the world opened up and I became aware that the SENsory Atelier project was taking place within our school. So I organised a meeting, I've got some of our teachers, our creative, artistic teachers involved, and we met with Bob and we discussed what the programme was. And he said to me that there are no outcomes. To which I said, I literally couldn't comprehend it at that point, you know. I think as educators we are under so much scrutiny, you know, as Jess said. Lesson observations as a teacher, planning scrutiny, or as senior leaders, you know, local authority visits to the school, challenge partner reviews, Ofsted, you know. We have to show the impact of what we do. How can we do that if we don't have outcomes? How can we be in control unless we're setting the destination and we're planning that route? I literally couldn't comprehend it. You know, now Bob, in his brilliant diplomatic way, said, okay, we'll have an outcome, and that outcome will be, we'll work towards a final project, which ended up being this beautiful mural that Sean Watson-Taylor helped us to create, and it's now proudly displayed in the main entrance of Westgate. But what he was clear about, he said, is that although we're working towards that outcome, the sessions themselves, the ateliers themselves, there won't be objectives set. That is not how this works. So again, I walked away a little bit baffled. Skip forward, we visited Italy. And during that visit, I saw so many examples of non-outcome-led learning taking place. If you want, you could describe it as a more pure form of learning. It was driven by intrigue, inquiry, discovery. It was totally led by the children, and the adults would respond to their curiosity. So, in then taking those ideas and thinking how we're going to do them, I thought about this idea of both and. So we do need outcomes, and I'm not for a moment advocating for the fact that we take away all outcomes from our, approach to education. It's really, really important, I think, especially at Westgate School as well, for even our most complex learners, they can learn in a linear way, a progression of skills that we can help to scaffold that development forward. But when I was thinking about this, I was also thinking there should be space for times when there are no outcomes. And it got me thinking about this idea of both and. So I just read, something that I sort of Googled an explanation of what this is, and hopefully it will become clear. So both and is an approach that acknowledges that multiple things can be true at the same time. It's an integrative approach that seeks to find ways to incorporate multiple options or perspective. Both and decision-making expands possibilities and holds that there are solutions that can accommodate even seemingly contradictory beliefs. Okay, so that's the conclusion that I came to. I'll just read my final thoughts on this as well. So, just as we strive for a broad and balanced curriculum that includes clear fundamentals for learning that support future success, literacy, numeracy skills, we also allow room for arts and humanities, for example. So likewise, we should be seeking to have a broad and balanced approach to pedagogical approaches. Space in our medium-term plans and our weekly timetables for outcome and non-outcome driven learning. Time to follow the route to the destination that we have planned, also time to go exploring and see what we find on the way. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm still standing here and there's a reason for that. I'm going to bring up a young person from Westgate in a second. When we were talking about Symposium and what we were going to bring to this event, we had a conversation about how important it is to hear the young people's voices in this process. As adults, as the people who have visited Reggio Emilia, as the people who have run the programme, we've all got our ideas and our opinions, but I think it's really important that we do hear the voice of the young people as well. So, in looking at which young person I was going to bring with me today, there was a few candidates from our People Parliament, but one young man stood out in particular. He's a young man that has, of his own accord, advocated for his peers with additional needs on several occasions around different issues. This has included contacting local councillors, contacting his local MP, getting into a dialogue, responding to emails about different issues that matter to him because he wants to advocate for young people with additional needs. We've drawn up a set of questions, so please welcome up to the stage Ben Score. Hello Ben.
Good morning.
Good morning. Right, so the first question I'm going to ask you is, how does Westgate School use art and creativity?
Alright, so Westgate School uses art and creativity to help students in lessons, encourage participation and improve mood. At Westgate, we have a dedicated sensory room and have lots of sensory and tactile equipment for pupils to use. Sensory can work both ways, as it can both excite pupils and be used as a method of de-stress. When pupils are upset or agitated, sensory and creative activities are crucial as they can have calming effects on the pupils. We've also held a competition for the students to create the best logo to be used for school events, which encourages pupils to be creative and use their art skills for enjoyment. Like Tom said, we also have a mural created that also sits outside of the main entrance of Westgate. Art is used in many lessons, and pupil artwork is displayed around the school, also on display boards outside of all the classrooms.
Fantastic. So my second question for Ben is, why is art and creativity an important part of education?
Well, art and creativity are both essential in education, as they allow teachers and pupils to communicate in a way that's not just verbal. Many people struggle to express themselves. Art can make people communication easier, as pupils can express their thoughts and feelings inside their artwork, even if they don't realise they're doing it. In addition to being an enjoyable activity, education can be improved by having students use imaginative skills to find solutions to problems. Creativity is useful in all subjects, as it allows students to be more flexible in their answers instead of sticking to one single solution.
Brilliant. And one final question for you, Ben. What do you think the future of education should look like for young people at schools like Westgate?
Well, some pupils may not have access to most experiences, so therefore it's also important pupils have many opportunities such as social events and work experience. It's also important that other people allow pupils with special needs to reach their full potential by understanding and tolerating their needs themselves. Inclusivity should also be focused on, not just in special schools, but also in mainstream schools, as it teaches pupils about topics such as disabilities and discourages ideas like discrimination. Continued support for special needs schools is also important, as special schools continue to provide pupils with accommodating education that mainstream schools may not be able to.
Thank you very much, Ben.